Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now, let's step inside. The world's toughest prisons compared, where survival matters more than the sentence. Around the world, prisons are built with the same promise: control, safety, and justice. But in reality, not all prisons are designed to do the same thing. Some are built to contain violence. Some are built to erase identity. Some are built to make survival itself the punishment. In certain prisons, the sentence you receive in court matters less than where you are sent. Because once the gates close, the rules of survival change completely. Food becomes currency. Silence becomes protection. Discipline becomes psychological. And in some places, simply making it through the day without being broken is considered success. This is not a story about one prison. This is a comparison of the world's toughest prison systems. Facilities so extreme that inmates measure time differently, adapt their behavior differently, and sometimes leave as entirely different people if they leave at all. From ultra-controlled environments where every breath is regulated, to overcrowded facilities where inmates enforce their own law, these prisons share one thing in common: they push human endurance to its limit. In this documentary, we compare how the toughest prisons on Earth operate, why they were designed this way, and what survival really looks like inside them, not through rumors or myths, but through systems, routines, and the psychological realities inmates face every single day. Because when prisons are compared side by side, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Some sentences are written on paper. Others are written into the human mind. And in the world's toughest prisons, survival is never guaranteed, no matter how long your sentence is. Where you are sent decides everything. In the global prison system, the crime matters, but the location matters more. Two people can commit similar offenses, receive similar sentences, and yet experience incarceration in completely different ways depending on where they are sent. In some countries, prisons are designed to enforce order through structure and discipline. In others, they are designed simply to contain bodies, leaving survival to be negotiated by inmates themselves. This difference is not accidental. It is a result of history, politics, resources, and philosophy, and it defines what tough really means. The world's toughest prisons are not all violent in the same way. Some are physically brutal, overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded, where inmates control daily life and violence is open and unpredictable. Others are psychologically severe, clean, quiet, and hyper-controlled, where discipline is so strict that individuality slowly disappears. Both environments break people, but they do so differently. Understanding this begins with one key truth: prisons are built to solve different problems. In countries facing gang dominance, corruption, or mass incarceration, prisons often become pressure valves. They are designed to isolate dangerous individuals quickly, sometimes at the cost of humane conditions. Overcrowding becomes normalized. Informal hierarchies emerge. Guards maintain distance for their own safety. In these environments, survival depends on alliances, reputation, and constant vigilance. In contrast, countries prioritizing order and deterrence often design prisons as systems of control. Here, violence is minimized not through force, but through structure. Silence is enforced. Movement is regulated. Routine replaces choice. The goal is not to dominate physically, but to condition behavior until resistance fades. Both approaches claim effectiveness. Both produce long-term consequences. In the toughest prisons, intake is not just administrative. It is a signal. New arrivals immediately learn what kind of environment they have entered. In overcrowded facilities, the lack of structure is obvious. Noise, movement, and visible tension fill the space. Inmates are quickly assessed by others: strength, vulnerability, usefulness. There is no adjustment period. Survival strategies must be adopted immediately. In highly controlled facilities, the shock is quieter. The absence of noise is unsettling. Instructions are precise. Choices disappear quickly. The system does not ask who you are. It tells you who you must become. Resistance here is inefficient, not dramatic. People adapt because the environment gives them no alternative. This distinction shapes everything that follows. In prisons where inmates enforce their own rules, Authority is decentralized. Power shifts constantly. Violence can erupt without warning, but it can also be negotiated. In these places, social intelligence becomes as important as physical strength. Knowing who to avoid, who to align with, and when to disappear matters more than official regulations. In prisons governed by absolute routine, authority is centralized. Power does not shift. It presses downward evenly. Inmates are not required to negotiate with each other as much, but they are required to negotiate internally, suppressing impulse, emotion, and individuality to survive. Both systems punish uncertainty. Inmate behavior adapts accordingly. In chaotic prisons, inmates remain hyper-aware of others. In controlled prisons, they become hyper-aware themselves. One environment externalizes danger. The other internalizes it. Time behaves differently in each. In overcrowded prisons, days are unpredictable. Events interrupt routine. Tension spikes and falls. Survival requires constant adjustment. In controlled prisons, days blur together. Nothing changes. Survival requires endurance rather than reaction. Neither experience is temporary. Long-term exposure reshapes the mind. In chaotic environments, trust erodes and aggression becomes normalized. In controlled environments, emotional restraint becomes habitual. In both cases, reintegration into society becomes difficult, but for different reasons. This is why comparing the world's toughest prisons matters. Tough is not a single condition. It is a spectrum of pressure points applied to human behavior. Some prisons test physical limits. Others test psychological limits. Some do both simultaneously. What they share is an environment where normal life skills stop applying. By the time an inmate understands where they've landed, the adaptation process has already begun. The sentence may be 10 years, but the prison decides how those 10 years will change you. When inmates run the prison, survival in chaos and overcrowding. In some of the world's toughest prisons, control does not come from routine or discipline. It comes from absence. These are facilities where the state's authority exists mostly on paper. Guards stay at the perimeter. Rules are loosely enforced. Overcrowding overwhelms infrastructure. And inside the walls, inmates build their own systems of order or disorder, depending on what keeps them alive. In these prisons, survival begins the moment you enter. There is no adjustment period, no gradual learning curve. New arrivals are assessed immediately by other inmates, not staff. Strength, fear, usefulness, and affiliation are evaluated within minutes. In places where cells hold far more people than they were designed for, space itself becomes currency. Overcrowding changes everything. When prisons operate far beyond capacity, privacy disappears completely. Inmates sleep inches apart, often on floors and hallways, or in makeshift sleeping areas. Personal space is non-existent. Noise is constant. Heat, poor ventilation, and unsanitary conditions amplify tension. In this environment, even small disputes can escalate rapidly. Authority fragments. Guards are present but distant. Their role is often reactive rather than preventative. Entering housing areas can be dangerous, so enforcement relies on inmate leaders to maintain internal order. This unofficial delegation of power creates hierarchies that are often more rigid and more violent than any formal system. Inmate-run systems emerge out of necessity. Leadership roles form around gangs, regional ties, or physical dominance. These leaders regulate access to food, sleeping areas, and protection. In exchange, they demand loyalty, labor, or resources. Refusal is rarely an option. Neutrality is dangerous. Everyone belongs to something, even if they never chose it. Violence here is not random. It is structured, purposeful, and often strategic. Punishments are carried out publicly to reinforce authority. Disputes are settled quickly to prevent prolonged instability. Fear becomes a management tool, used to discourage defiance and maintain control. Daily life revolves around negotiation. Inmates constantly assess risk, where to stand, who to talk to, when to remain silent. Alliances shift. Debts accumulate. Favors are remembered. The social landscape is fluid, and misreading it can be fatal. Survival requires social intelligence as much as physical resilience. The psychological toll is relentless. Unlike controlled prisons where routine dulls emotion, Chaotic prisons keep inmates in a constant state of alert. Sleep is fragmented. Trust is rare. The nervous system never fully relaxes. Over time, hypervigilance becomes a default state. This environment reshapes identity quickly. Aggression becomes normalized. Empathy becomes dangerous. Displays of weakness invite exploitation. Inmates learn to project strength even when exhausted or afraid. Emotional suppression is not taught. It is enforced by circumstance. Food and resources become weapons. Access to meals, clean water, or basic hygiene items is often controlled by inmate groups. Scarcity intensifies competition. Hunger increases irritability. Small advantages matter. Survival depends on securing a stable position within the informal economy of the prison. Time behaves unpredictably. Days are interrupted by fights, lockdowns, or sudden changes in power. There is no reliable routine to anchor to. Planning becomes difficult. Long-term thinking fades. The focus narrows to immediate survival. Release, when it comes, is disorienting. Former inmates from these environments often struggle with trust and impulse control. The constant need to scan for threats does not disappear easily. Civilian life feels slow, vulnerable, and exposed. Aggression, once protective, becomes maladaptive. What makes these prisons among the toughest in the world is not just violence. It is instability. When the system fails to impose order, inmates create their own. And those systems are built for survival, not rehabilitation. They reward dominance, punish vulnerability, and leave lasting marks on anyone forced to live within them. This form of incarceration does not teach obedience. It teaches endurance through chaos. And for those who survive it, the cost is often paid long after the sentence ends. When the system becomes a weapon, psychological control in extreme order. Not all of the world's toughest prisons rely on chaos to break inmates. Some rely on perfection. These are facilities where violence is rare, noise is controlled, and routines never change. On the surface, they appear calm, even humane. But beneath that order lies a different kind of pressure, one that works slowly, quietly, and relentlessly on the human mind. In these prisons, the system itself becomes the weapon. Every day is identical. Wake-up times never shift. Movements are synchronized. Meals occur at the same minute, eaten the same way, in the same posture. Work is repetitive and exact. Silence is enforced not through threats, but through expectation. There is a correct way to exist, and deviation, even accidental, is noticed. This level of order removes unpredictability. And unpredictability is where most people find freedom. When nothing ever changes, resistance loses meaning. There is nothing to react to, nothing to negotiate with, nothing to challenge. The environment does not argue back. It simply continues, unmoved, unresponsive, and absolute. Inmates adapt by turning inward. They begin monitoring themselves constantly. Every movement is calculated. Every action is rehearsed mentally before being performed. Over time, this self-surveillance becomes automatic. Even when no one is watching, behavior remains controlled. This internalization is the goal. The prison no longer needs to correct inmates frequently because the inmates correct themselves. Discipline becomes reflex. Obedience becomes instinct. The body responds before the mind has time to question. Emotion becomes inefficient. Anger has nowhere to go. Frustration cannot be expressed. Joy has no outlet. Emotional responses, once natural, begin to feel disruptive. Inmates learn to flatten their reactions, not because they are told to, but because expression creates risk. This emotional narrowing reduces conflict, but it also reduces identity. When people are denied meaningful choices for long periods, they stop seeing themselves as decision makers. Preferences fade. Opinions become irrelevant. Life becomes procedural rather than personal. Days are remembered not as experiences, but as sequences of tasks. Time stretches in strained ways. Without variation, memory blurs. Weeks and months collapse into each other. Inmates remember routines clearly, but struggle to recall specific moments. Life feels suspended, as if waiting for something that never arrives. This psychological pressure is subtle but profound. There are no dramatic breakdowns, no constant crises. Instead, there is a slow erosion of self. People become quieter, more compliant, less expressive. From the outside, this looks like success. Order is maintained. Incidents are rare. But inside, something is lost. Human beings need friction to define themselves, choice, conflict, unpredictability. When all of that is removed, behavior stabilizes, but growth stops. Survival becomes maintenance. Release from these environments is often harder than expected. Former inmates describe feeling overwhelmed by choice. Simple decisions feel heavy. Noise feels aggressive. Freedom feels chaotic. The structure that once confined them now feels like the only thing that made sense. This is the paradox of extreme order. It creates calm by narrowing the human experience. It prevents violence by suppressing individuality. It maintains control by removing the conditions that allow resistance to form. In the comparison of the world's toughest prisons, these facilities stand in stark contrast to chaotic, inmate-run institutions. One breaks people through instability. The other breaks them through consistency. Both leave marks. One teaches constant vigilance. The other teaches constant restraint. And both reshape the human mind in ways that last far beyond the prison walls. The body pays the price. Physical survival under extreme conditions. While the psychological impact of the world's toughest prisons is often hidden, the physical toll is impossible to ignore. No matter how a prison enforces control, through chaos or order, the human body is forced to adapt to conditions it was never designed to endure. In overcrowded, inmate-run prisons, the body is under constant strain. Sleep is irregular and shallow. Inmates often rest in shifts, guarding their belongings and their position in the hierarchy. Mattresses are scarce. Floors, benches, and improvised platforms become beds. Muscles never fully relax. The body remains alert even during rest, ready to respond to sudden threats. Nutrition is inconsistent. Meals may be inadequate, poorly prepared, or controlled by inmate groups. Hunger is common. When food becomes currency, weaker inmates eat last or not at all. Over time, malnutrition weakens immune systems, slows healing, and increases vulnerability to illness and injury. Hygiene is another battleground. Overcrowding overwhelms sanitation systems. Showers are limited. Clean water may be scarce. Infections spread quickly. Skin conditions, respiratory problems, and gastrointestinal illnesses become part of daily life. Medical care exists, but access is delayed, inconsistent, or dependent on status within the prison's informal hierarchy. Violence leaves lasting marks. Even when not directly involved, inmates carry the physical consequences of constant tension, clenched jaws, chronic headaches, high blood pressure. Injuries are often untreated or poorly treated. Pain becomes normalized. The body learns to function through discomfort. In highly controlled prisons, physical strain looks different, but it is no less real. Movement is restricted. Exercise is limited and regimented. Bodies stiffen from repetition and lack of variation. Posture requirements place stress on joints and muscles. Sitting, standing, and walking in prescribed ways for years reshapes the body itself. Sleep here is regular, but not restorative. Light schedules and constant awareness interfere with deep rest. The body follows routine, but the mind never fully disengages. Over time, fatigue accumulates quietly, affecting reaction time, concentration, and emotional regulation. Medical care is orderly but minimal. Treatment focuses on maintaining functionality rather than improving quality of life. Chronic pain is managed, not resolved. Aging accelerates under confinement. Injuries that would be minor outside become permanent limitations inside. Time compounds physical decline. Years of restricted movement weaken muscles. Limited sunlight affects bone density and circadian rhythms. Stress hormones remain elevated, increasing risk of cardiovascular disease. The body adapts to survive, but adaptation often means deterioration. The contrast between prison types is striking. In chaotic prisons, bodies are pushed to their limits through instability, violence, and deprivation. In controlled prisons, bodies are worn down through rigidity, repetition, and constraint. One exhausts through unpredictability. The other erodes through monotony. Both environments teach the same lesson. The body becomes a tool for survival, not expression. Pain is ignored. Fatigue is endured. Discomfort is expected. Over time, inmates stop listening to their bodies because attention does not lead to relief. Release does not reverse this damage. Former inmates carry physical habits and injuries with them. Tense posture, shallow breathing, chronic pain, limited mobility. The body remembers confinement long after freedom is restored. Recovery, when possible, takes years. This is why the world's toughest prisons cannot be judged by walls alone. Their true impact is written into the bodies of those who live inside them. Every day survived leaves a mark, not always visible, but always felt. Physical survival is not just about staying alive. It is about enduring conditions that slowly reshape what it means to inhabit a human body. After the gates open, why survival doesn't end with release. For inmates who leave the world's toughest prisons, freedom does not arrive cleanly. The gates open. Paperwork is signed. The sentence is officially complete. But the systems that taught them how to survive do not shut off at the same time. What kept them alive inside often follows them outside, shaping behavior, perception, and identity long after confinement ends. Release exposes a hard truth. Survival skills do not translate into living skills. Inmates from chaotic, inmate-run prisons step into a world that feels dangerously unstructured. On the inside, every interaction carried risk. Outside, that constant vigilance has nowhere to go. Crowds feel threatening. Sudden movements trigger reflexes. Trust feels irresponsible. The body remains on alert even when there is no visible danger. Aggression, once protective, becomes problematic. Quick reactions, dominance displays, and emotional suppression helped inmates avoid victimization behind bars. Outside, those same behaviors isolate them. Conflict escalates quickly. Misunderstandings feel personal. Relationships fracture before they form. For those released from highly controlled prisons, the shock is different, but equally destabilizing. Life outside is noisy, unpredictable, and full of choices. After years of rigid routine, choice feels overwhelming. Deciding when to eat, where to go, how to speak. These are freedoms most people take for granted, but for former inmates, they can provoke anxiety rather than relief. Structure, once oppressive, now feels necessary. Many impose strict routines on themselves immediately. Fixed wake-up times, repetitive schedules, limited social contact. This self-imposed order provides stability, but it can also trap them in a prison that exists only in habit and expectation. Emotion returns unevenly. Some former inmates feel numb for months or years. Others experience sudden surges of anger, panic, or sadness without clear cause. The nervous system, conditioned for survival, struggles to recalibrate. Without the familiar boundaries of prison life, emotions feel uncontained. Reentry systems often underestimate this reality. Support programs focus on employment, housing, and supervision, all important, but incomplete. They rarely address the psychological conditioning created by extreme incarceration. Former inmates are expected to adjust quickly, even when adjustment requires relearning how to exist as autonomous human beings. This gap increases the risk of failure. When stress overwhelms coping mechanisms, people revert to what they know. For some, that means isolation. For others, it means conflict. In the worst cases, it means returning to environments that feel familiar, even if they are harmful. The toughest prisons leave the deepest shadows. They do not just punish crime. They reshape behavior. They redefine safety. They alter how people understand authority, trust, and self-worth. These changes do not fade with time alone. They require support, patience, and understanding that survival inside extreme conditions leaves permanent impressions. This is a final comparison that matters. Chaotic prisons teach constant vigilance. Controlled prisons teach constant restraint. Both prepare inmates to survive confinement, and both leave them unprepared for freedom. The world's toughest prisons succeed at one thing exceptionally well, keeping people alive under extreme pressure. But survival on its own is not rehabilitation. Without pathways to rebuild identity, autonomy, and connection, release becomes another test, one that many are never fully equipped to pass. In the end, The measure of a prison's toughness is not only what happens inside its walls, it is what follows people long after they leave them behind. Survival is the sentence. When prisons around the world are compared side by side, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. There is no single definition of tough. Some prisons crush through chaos, overcrowding, violence, and instability where inmates are forced to become their own law. Others crush through order, silence, routine, and discipline so strict that resistance disappears before it can even form. Different systems, different methods, the same result. Survival becomes the sentence. Inside the world's toughest prisons, time is no longer just time. It is pressure. It reshapes the body through exhaustion and deprivation. It reshapes the mind through vigilance or restraint. And it reshapes identity until living becomes a matter of endurance rather than purpose. For those who remain inside, adaptation is not optional. It is the price of staying alive. For those who leave, survival does not end at the gate. The habits, instincts, and conditioning built under extreme conditions follow them into relationships, into work, into everyday life. These prisons succeed at control. They reduce chaos. They maintain order. They keep people contained. But the deeper question remains unresolved. What happens to human beings shaped by these environments once the sentence is served? Because when incarceration teaches only how to survive pressure, freedom becomes another test. One without clear rules, clear structure, or clear outcomes. The world's toughest prisons are not defined by walls or weapons. They are defined by what they take, quietly, consistently, and permanently. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.